Tell me,
Yeah.
who are you and what are you doing? What is all this work about? Who are you, Mitch?
Yeah. Well, so the simplest I'll start with the simplest explain, and then I'll explain how I got to this overall. So essentially, the work I do is I like to call myself an orgone energy researcher. Sometimes I refer to myself as an etheric realm repairman, and that comes from this notion of the energy, frequency, vibration that we all kind of know, to understand the universe, and that whole quote that the allegedly Tesla famous quote about frequency, and using energy, or how this whole place operates and is it can be manipulated by energy. This whole reality in which we are is essentially what I call it the twilight zone. I think there's nothing about this reality that is even remotely close to anything we were all originally told when we first got here, or what we were what we were sort of manufactured to believe, or influenced to believe. It's like the opposite. And so I got into this energy work. This was approximately around late 2015, and I was a little bit, I think in the scheme of most folks who are probably listening to this, I was a little bit late to the party when it came to the quote unquote waking up. I knew after 2012 there were all, conspiracies and different things like that, and I'm sure everyone's seen Zeitgeist and, dabbled in all these different concepts, but it was really around 2015 that I went from observing things like, I'll say, chemtrails in the sky, for example, things that I felt shouldn't be there, or things that didn't have an explanation, that didn't make sense, that didn't go along with my preconceived notions of this reality. And all of these things kind of started falling apart. So I dived into a lot of the typical breadcrumbs that I think a lot of people early on, like whatever. I know this is a dirty word for some people and a better word for others, but like I got into the work of David Icke. That was one of the first crash courses I got into knowing at least that reality was not what I had been brought up to believe.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I'm of the philosophy too that I don't, regardless of what I think about anybody, everyone's playing their role. I do completely acknowledge that everyone plays their role to whatever the process is that someone uses to furthering their expansion of consciousness. So, in 2015, I had come across a term. Really, it's not a very romantic idea. It's quite boring, but it was just that I Googled a term on chemtrails when I started learning what, like this word, and being like, okay, let's figure out what these are. And I knew there was something energetic about it that really, now I would say it lowered my vibration. Back then, I didn't know what really that meant, but I just knew there was something, I hated it. I just knew whatever it was, I knew I didn't like it. And so I had started searching the internet for simple concepts of, how to stop chemtrails. Like, and even just the idea of like, it's like, you don't even know, I didn't even know what I was asking really at the time. But crossing these words on the internet, I came across a very small sort of like a Reddit or subreddit forum group. It was like, it wasn't actually Reddit, but it was one of those types of websites, just people talking throughout the interwebs in these tiny little chat rooms about this idea that you could do something about chemtrails in the sky because it had something to do with in this case it was cell towers. It had to do with cell towers down on the ground. The expansion I was getting on learning different concepts about the universe, I was learning about energy, and then I was learning about what, using frequency and the idea of be careful what you wish for, thoughts become things, the manifestation. I even for a while I got into people like Abraham Hicks and that whole thing. I know that can be a hot topic for a lot of people. And so it was my crash course into, again, just knowing something was not what I had always been told. So I heard about this thing that they called organite, and I came across, I call it the stupid hockey puck. And I said, there's this stupid hockey puck shaped device, and that would be like an organite tower buster, we call it. It looks like a little hockey puck. And these people in these different groups had been around for a number of years, essentially putting this stuff, orgonite, around towers, or meaning cell towers. They were putting it within a certain proximity of basically anything that was feeding an EMF signal or emitting an EMF signal. Now, at the beginning of this, it was very limited information, but there were some spearheads in the community. It's a light word to use, community, because there really isn't a community, and that's the best thing it has going for it. Because once you form a group, it can be infiltrated. But
Yes, yes.
essentially, these pioneers, I would call them, in what I call the Orgone gifting movement or the tower busting movement, people like Don Croft and Carol Croft and George Ritchell, they were utilizing this device, the orgonite, to neutralize these effects coming off of towers. The towers were essentially creating a giant web, and that web down here on the ground was working in tandem with the lines that we saw, what we say sprayed. That's kind of a dirty word for me nowadays, but we'll say sprayed in the sky. So towers and chemtrails, for some weird reason, these people believed those two things went hand in hand. And with one, or without one, you didn't have the other. So they put this stuff, the orgonite, around the towers. They were seeing, basically, they were seeing chemtrails breaking apart. They were seeing them behave differently than pretty much everyone else who just let them be. And they started noticing things about towers. They started noticing things about biological life. They started noticing things about animals and the reactions people were having on a physical and emotional, energetic, and spiritual level. So it opened up this huge can of worms that essentially, fast forwarding to today, like technology, this is a loaded statement, but technology is essentially a gateway or a gateway tool in and throughout the ether, or whatever we would call a dimensional. I think of it as like technology is sort of like a multi-dimensional tool, all of it. And that's what I believe. And these people had utilized this orgonite to essentially break apart, which is why they call it tower busting, to break apart the frequency web that was holding and manipulating and making those things in the sky, the chemtrails, to exist. They saw fewer in the sky. They saw weather patterns changing. They saw improvements in the weather, and really essentially just improvements in their whole entire in their entire environment. And so as I was learning about this, I thought this has to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I don't know how throwing a hockey puck near a cell tower is going to do anything about a plane that's spraying something. But I've always been a determined person who kind of has to prove a point. Some people, I know ego is a dirty word too, but like I do have a sense of ego. I like to use it as a tool to push myself to accomplish things I might not otherwise accomplish. And so I set out to essentially prove that this stuff didn't work. And this was at a time in late 2015, early 2016, when I lived in the city of Chicago, which is a technology soup, a condensed. Think about the millions of people that are condensed in this area, and within those millions of people, you've got ungodly amounts of cell towers, but also just an insane, immeasurable amount of devices, your Wi-Fi routers, your cell phones, your smart meters, all the things that are emitting the frequency that essentially works collectively in this thing, which now I call the frequency fence. I think other people call it the frequency fence as well. And so I set out to go and do the same thing that these people were doing. And I thought, I'm in this condensed area. It's not going to be very hard for me to go and do this orgonite gifting, they called it, because you're gifting it to the planet, or you're gifting it to your environment, and it's coming out of someone's pocket because you have to take the time to buy the materials and make it. And so I set out to do this with my better half, and lo and behold, over time of making all these tower busters and distributing them, gifting them around these, starting with my home, starting with my neighborhood, working my way outward, I started seeing a lot of these very weird anomalies, things in the sky, different weather patterns, things that were comparable to the